Chosen one. Before this message reaches its end, one hidden truth will begin to make sense in a way you never expected. Someone who has carried your name silently inside their heart for far longer than you realize is standing on the edge of a decision that could change not only their own future, but yours as well. The surprise they are preparing is not something loud, flashy, or easy for the world to notice. It has been growing quietly through sleepless nights, unanswered questions, painful sacrifices, and countless moments when they almost gave up. But they never truly stopped believing that one day the distance between you would finally have a reason to disappear. Listen carefully. Because every detail you are about to hear is part of a fictional story about hope, timing, and love. As this story unfolds, you may begin to recognize emotions that feel deeply familiar, and that is exactly why you should stay until the very last moment. Don't skip. There was a time when this person believed they had already lost you forever. Every attempt to move on only reminded them of what their heart refused to forget. Friends encouraged them to begin a new chapter. Family members introduced new possibilities. More than once they were told that waiting for someone they could not reach was foolish. Yet every new path somehow led them back to the same memory. Your memory. They never spoke about it openly because they feared being misunderstood, but inside, they kept one promise alive. If life ever gave them one genuine opportunity to make things right, they would not waste it again. What nobody around them understood was that they had quietly started preparing for that opportunity long before anyone noticed. Small decisions began changing. Old habits disappeared. They worked harder than before. They became more patient, more careful with their words, and stronger in moments when nobody was watching. To everyone else it looked like ordinary personal growth, but in their heart every step had only one purpose: becoming the kind of person who would never lose you a second time. Don't skip. Then something happened that even they did not expect. During an ordinary conversation, someone accidentally mentioned your name. The room continued as if nothing important had been said, but for them, time almost stopped. It was not because they had forgotten you. It was because hearing your name after so long reminded them that some feelings do not disappear simply because time passes. Instead of reopening old pain, it awakened a quiet determination they had buried for years. That single moment became the beginning of a secret plan. They stopped talking about impossible dreams and started creating realistic ones. They organized their finances more carefully. They repaired relationships they had neglected. They began letting go of pride that had once kept them silent. Every small victory became another piece of a much larger surprise that nobody around them could fully understand. The most surprising part was that they refused to tell anyone what they were planning. Even those closest to them only noticed that they smiled more often, stayed calmer during difficult situations, and seemed strangely confident about the future. Whenever someone asked what had changed, they simply answered, "You'll understand when the time is right." Don't skip. But every meaningful surprise faces one final obstacle before it can become reality. And the obstacle waiting ahead is far greater than either of them expected. Someone from the past is about to discover what has been quietly unfolding, and the decision that follows could either bring two hearts closer than ever before, or delay everything once again. The truth behind that moment will change the direction of this story forever. The days that followed did not bring instant answers. Instead, they tested every bit of patience this person had spent years trying to build. They understood that a surprise powerful enough to change two lives could never be rushed. Every choice had to be thoughtful, every conversation had to happen at the right moment, and every step forward had to be made with complete honesty. For the first time in a very long while, they were no longer acting out of fear of losing someone. They were acting out of hope that, if destiny ever opened a single door, they would be ready to walk through it without hesitation. That quiet confidence became impossible to ignore. The people around them noticed they no longer argued over small things, no longer wasted energy proving themselves, and no longer chased approval from those who had once doubted them. Something inside them had changed, although nobody could explain exactly what it was. Don't skip. One evening, while sorting through a box of old keepsakes they had almost thrown away years before, they found something they believed had disappeared forever. It was not valuable because of money. It was valuable because of the memory attached to it. Holding it in their hands brought back a flood of moments they had spent years trying to bury beneath responsibilities, disappointments, and unanswered questions. Instead of bringing pain, those memories brought clarity. They finally understood that the greatest mistake they had ever made was believing that silence could protect the people they cared about. Silence had protected nothing. It had only created distance where honesty might have built a bridge. At that moment they made themselves a promise. If another opportunity ever appeared, they would speak with courage instead of fear, with truth instead of hesitation, and with kindness instead of regret. From that day forward, the surprise they were preparing became much more than a simple gesture. It became a symbol of the person they had decided to become. They quietly reached out to old friends they had lost touch with, repaired misunderstandings that had lingered for years, and let go of bitterness they had carried far too long. None of these changes were made to impress anyone. They believed that genuine love should never begin with pretending to be someone else. If this new chapter was ever going to begin, it had to be built on authenticity rather than illusion. They wanted every future conversation to begin without hidden secrets, unfinished apologies, or unanswered questions standing in the way. Don't skip. What they did not realize was that someone else had begun noticing these changes from a distance. This observer could not understand why a person who had once seemed ready to abandon hope now looked more determined than ever. Curiosity slowly turned into concern. Concern slowly turned into suspicion. Quiet questions began spreading through conversations that seemed completely ordinary on the surface. Why have they changed so much? What are they planning? Who are they waiting for? No one had the full picture, yet everyone seemed eager to guess the ending before the story had even reached its most important chapter. Meanwhile, the surprise itself continued taking shape piece by piece. Every detail mattered. Every decision carried emotional weight. This person refused to settle for anything that felt rushed or incomplete because they knew that some moments only come once in a lifetime. They imagined what they would say if the chance finally arrived. They practiced speaking honestly without sounding dramatic. They imagined difficult questions and prepared truthful answers. They even accepted the possibility that things might not unfold exactly as they hoped. Yet despite that uncertainty, they kept moving forward. For them, real courage was never the absence of fear. It was choosing to move despite fear. As the days passed, one final piece unexpectedly fell into place. A message arrived from someone connected to the past, someone who knew far more about the old misunderstandings than anyone had ever admitted. Reading those words changed everything. Hidden assumptions suddenly made sense. Long-standing confusion began to unravel. For the first time, they realized that not every painful chapter had been caused by choice. Some had been caused by silence, timing, and misunderstandings that had quietly grown larger with every passing year. Don't skip. They folded the message carefully and looked toward the future with a calm smile that nobody else could understand. The surprise was almost ready. Only one final decision remained, and once that choice was made, there would be no turning back. Whether the ending brought joyful reunion or unexpected heartbreak, one truth had become impossible to deny: living with honesty would always be better than living with endless regret. And somewhere beyond everything they could see, another unexpected event had already begun moving toward them, preparing to test whether hope alone would truly be enough. The following morning arrived with an unusual sense of calm, yet beneath that calm every heartbeat seemed to carry the weight of countless unanswered questions. The person who had spent so much time preparing this life-changing surprise could feel that the moment they had imagined for so long was finally beginning to move closer. Nothing around them looked extraordinary. The streets were the same, the sky looked no different, and people continued living their ordinary lives without realizing that someone's entire future was quietly approaching a turning point. They understood that the biggest moments rarely announce themselves with noise. Instead, they arrived disguised as ordinary days, hiding extraordinary changes until the very last second. That realization gave them strength. They stopped wondering whether everything would be perfect and started focusing on making every decision sincere. If this surprise was ever going to mean anything, it had to come from a heart that no longer carried fear, pride, or unfinished resentment. Don't skip. Before taking another step, they decided there was one thing they absolutely had to do. They sat alone with a blank sheet of paper and began writing words they had never been brave enough to speak aloud. It was not a letter asking for sympathy, nor was it an attempt to erase the past. Instead, it was an honest confession about everything they had learned through loss, distance, patience, and personal growth. Every sentence reminded them that genuine love is not measured by dramatic promises but by quiet consistency. They admitted the mistakes they had made without blaming anyone else. They acknowledged the moments when fear had spoken louder than love. They thanked fate for every painful lesson because those lessons had slowly transformed them into someone capable of protecting, respecting, and appreciating the people they cared about. When they finished writing, they did not immediately fold the paper away. They read every word again, asking themselves one simple question: if this were the last chance I ever had to speak from my heart, would these words truly reflect who I have become? The answer came with unexpected peace. For the first time in years, they felt no need to change a single sentence. As they carefully placed the letter inside an envelope, another unexpected event unfolded. An old friend, someone who had quietly watched this entire journey from the sidelines, appeared without warning. After exchanging a few ordinary greetings, the friend smiled and said something that immediately caught their attention. "I never told you this before," the friend admitted softly, "because I thought it would only bring more pain. But there were moments when everything could have turned out differently if people had simply spoken the truth sooner." Those words hung in the air long after the conversation ended. They did not reveal every answer, yet they confirmed something deeply important: not every separation had been caused by a lack of love. Sometimes fear, assumptions, and silence had created walls that nobody knew how to break. Instead of becoming angry, they felt an overwhelming sense of compassion for everyone involved. Carrying bitterness any longer would only repeat the same mistakes that had stolen so much time already. Don't skip. Later that evening, while reviewing the final details of the surprise, they noticed one small piece was still missing. It seemed insignificant at first, but the more they thought about it, the more they realized it represented something much greater. This final piece was not an object that could be purchased or replaced. It was courage itself. They understood that even the most carefully planned surprise would remain meaningless unless they were willing to stand before the truth with complete honesty. There would be no disguises, no rehearsed performance, and no attempt to manipulate anyone's emotions. Whatever happened next would happen because two people deserved the chance to hear the truth without fear standing between them. That night's sleep came only in brief moments. Every time they closed their eyes, different possibilities played through their mind. In one future, everything ended with smiles, forgiveness, and a brand new beginning. In another, they imagined walking away with quiet acceptance, grateful that they had finally spoken honestly even if the answer was not the one they hoped for. Surprisingly, neither possibility frightened them anymore. The greatest victory was no longer the outcome itself, it was the decision to stop hiding from the life they truly wanted to build. Growth had quietly replaced desperation, and peace had slowly taken the place of anxiety. Don't skip. As dawn approached, a single notification appeared on their phone. It was short, unexpected, and impossible to ignore. There were only a few carefully chosen words, yet those words changed the entire direction of the day. Someone had discovered a forgotten truth connected to the past, and they were asking for one meeting before any final decision was made. No explanation was offered. No details were included. Only a place, a time, and one sentence that echoed through their heart long after the screen went dark, before you reveal your surprise. There is something you deserve to know. At that moment they realized the journey was far from over, because the greatest revelation had been waiting patiently until the exact moment when every heart involved was finally ready to hear it. The morning of that meeting felt unlike any other. Every minute seemed slower than usual, as though time itself understood that two completely different futures were waiting on the other side of a single conversation. The person carrying the carefully prepared surprise looked at the envelope one last time before leaving. It had become much more than folded pages and carefully chosen words. It represented every lesson learned through loneliness, every promise made during silent nights, every mistake that had been transformed into wisdom, and every hope that had somehow survived despite countless reasons to disappear. They took a deep breath, placed it safely inside their bag, and quietly reminded themselves that no matter what happened today, they would not hide behind fear ever again. For years they had imagined this moment in hundreds of different ways, yet now that it had finally arrived, they realized that imagination could never truly prepare anyone for the weight of reality. Don't skip. The meeting place was peaceful, almost strangely ordinary, making it difficult to believe that something so important was about to unfold there. A gentle breeze moved through the trees while people nearby continued their daily routines without realizing that someone's life was standing on the edge of permanent change. They arrived a little earlier than expected, choosing a quiet place where they could gather their thoughts before anyone else appeared. Minutes passed slowly until familiar footsteps finally broke the silence. Standing only a short distance away was the person who had sent the mysterious message the night before. There was no dramatic entrance, no raised voice, and no emotional outburst. Instead, there was only a long moment of silence as both of them searched for the right words to begin a conversation that should have happened years ago. The visitor slowly reached into a small folder and carefully removed several old documents. Time had slightly faded the edges, but the memories attached to them remained painfully clear. "You deserve to know why everything became so complicated," they said quietly. "Not because it will erase the past, but because the truth should never remain hidden forever." One by one, they began revealing forgotten details that had never been shared openly. Small misunderstandings had grown into larger assumptions. Honest intentions had been mistaken for rejection. Important messages had never reached the people they were meant for. Decisions had been made using incomplete information, allowing silence to become stronger than trust. Listening to every explanation felt like watching scattered pieces of a puzzle finally finding their proper place. The pain of the past did not suddenly disappear, but it finally began to make sense. Don't skip. As the conversation continued, one unexpected realization became impossible to ignore. Throughout all those years, neither side had truly stopped caring. They had simply been living inside different versions of the same story. Each believed the other had chosen to walk away, while in reality both had been waiting for a sign that never arrived. That discovery brought an overwhelming mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because genuine feelings had never completely disappeared. Sadness because so much valuable time had been lost to fear, pride, and silence. For a brief moment, nobody spoke. Words suddenly felt too small for emotions that had quietly accumulated over so many seasons. The visitor then smiled gently and pointed toward the envelope still resting inside the bag. "Whatever you plan to do today," they said, "don't change it because of what I've told you. If your heart has finally found the courage to speak honestly, let it speak completely." Those simple words carried more encouragement than any grand speech ever could. Instead of creating confusion, they strengthened the very reason the surprise had been prepared in the first place. This was never about creating a perfect moment. It was about creating an honest one. Don't skip. Later that afternoon, as the sun slowly began its descent, every final detail was quietly set into motion. The place had been prepared with simplicity rather than extravagance because the person understood that sincere emotions never need expensive decorations to become unforgettable. Every choice reflected authenticity. Every small detail carried personal meaning. They checked everything one final time, not because they feared failure, but because they wanted nothing to distract from the truth they were finally ready to share. Just as everything seemed ready, another unexpected message appeared. Unlike the previous one, this message contained only a single sentence. "There is one more person who knows the complete story. And they are on their way." For several long seconds, they simply stared at the screen. They had believed every hidden chapter had already been uncovered, yet this new message suggested that the biggest revelation had not even begun. Questions raced through their mind. Who was this person? Why had they remained silent until now? And what truth could possibly be so important that it had waited until the very moment the surprise was finally about to be revealed? Without realizing it, their heartbeat quickened once again. They closed their phone, looked toward the entrance, and waited. Because within the next few moments, someone from the past was about to arrive carrying the one answer that had the power to change every chapter of this story forever. The atmosphere changed the moment another figure slowly appeared in the distance. No one spoke immediately. It was as if every unanswered question from the past had quietly gathered into this single moment, waiting for someone to finally have the courage to tell the complete truth. The person carrying the surprise remained completely still, not because they were afraid, but because they understood that rushing this moment could destroy everything they had patiently rebuilt. As the stranger came closer, there was something strangely familiar in their expression. It was not simply recognition, it was the feeling that fate had been patiently arranging this meeting long before anyone involved realized it. Every step they took seemed to erase another layer of confusion that had covered the past for so many years. When they finally stood face to face, the silence itself carried more emotion than words ever could. "Don't skip." The newcomer looked at both of them before quietly saying, For a long time I believed keeping silent was protecting everyone. Today I understand that silence only protected the misunderstanding. Those words immediately changed the atmosphere. There was no anger in their voice, only regret. They slowly explained that years earlier they had witnessed conversations, difficult decisions, and emotional moments that nobody else had fully understood. They admitted they had seen fear disguised as pride, love disguised as distance, and sacrifice mistaken for rejection. At the time, they convinced themselves that staying out of the situation was the wisest choice. But as the years passed, they realized that every month of silence had allowed false assumptions to become accepted as truth. They apologized, not expecting forgiveness, but believing that honesty was long overdue. Every sentence they shared connected another missing piece of the story. Events that once seemed random suddenly formed a clear pattern. Moments that had felt like intentional abandonment were revealed to be painful misunderstandings created by timing, incomplete information, and people acting without knowing the full picture. No one had truly wanted to create permanent distance. Everyone had simply been making decisions while carrying only half of the truth. That realization did not erase the years that had already passed, but it removed the invisible weight that had followed every memory. For the first time, the past no longer felt like an enemy. It became a teacher that had quietly shaped everyone into stronger, wiser versions of themselves. Don't skip. After a long pause, the person holding the surprise finally reached into their bag and carefully removed the envelope they had protected for so long. Their hands trembled slightly, not because they doubted what was written inside, but because they understood that once those words were shared, there would be no returning to silence. They looked at the people standing before them and smiled gently. "I didn't prepare this to change anyone's mind," they said softly. "I prepared it because I promised myself I would never allow fear to speak louder than truth again." Slowly, they opened the envelope and began reading every word exactly as it had been written. There were no dramatic promises, no impossible guarantees, and no attempt to rewrite history. Instead, the letter spoke about gratitude, growth, accountability, forgiveness, and the quiet hope that honest hearts deserve at least one chance to speak without being interrupted by old misunderstandings. As each paragraph was read aloud, the emotions surrounding everyone became impossible to hide. Some smiled through tears. Others lowered their eyes, remembering choices they wished they had handled differently. Yet nobody interrupted, because every sentence carried the unmistakable sound of sincerity. It became clear that the greatest surprise had never been hidden inside the envelope itself. The real surprise was the transformation of the person reading it. Years earlier they might have spoken with desperation, resentment, or blame. Today they spoke with peace. That change was more powerful than any dramatic gesture could ever have been. Don't skip. Just when it seemed the story had finally reached the moment everyone had been waiting for, an unexpected sound interrupted the silence. A phone resting on the nearby table began to ring. The screen displayed a name that nobody expected to see. For a few long seconds, no one reached for it. Every heartbeat seemed louder than the ringtone itself. Whoever was calling had no idea that years of hidden truth had just been uncovered, yet instinctively everyone felt that answering this call would begin an entirely new chapter. The person holding the phone slowly looked around the room before taking a deep breath and whispering, "Whatever happens next, this conversation will decide where all of us go from here." With steady hands, they finally answered the call, unaware that the voice waiting on the other end carried one final revelation that none of them had imagined. The voice on the other end of the call did not speak immediately. For a few seconds there was nothing except quiet breathing, as though the caller was searching for enough courage to say words that had remained trapped inside for years. Everyone in the room instinctively fell silent. No one moved. No one interrupted. The person holding the phone slowly stepped closer to the window, allowing the fading evening light to fall across the unopened future that now stood directly in front of them. Finally, the silence broke. "I don't know if I have the right to ask for your forgiveness," the caller said softly, "but you deserve to hear one last truth before you make the decision you've been preparing for." Those words immediately changed the atmosphere once again. It no longer felt like an ordinary conversation. It felt like the final missing chapter of a story that had been written across many years without anyone realizing how closely every moment had been connected. The caller admitted that they had once believed they were protecting everyone by keeping certain things hidden. They feared that revealing the full truth would only create greater pain, greater conflict, and greater uncertainty. Instead, the opposite had happened. Silence had allowed assumptions to grow stronger than reality. People had accepted incomplete stories because no one had been willing to reveal the complete one. Looking back now, the caller realized that honesty, even when uncomfortable, would have been far kinder than years of unanswered questions. "Don't skip." The room remained completely still as every word settled into every heart. No one tried to defend the past anymore. Blame suddenly seemed meaningless. Everyone had made decisions based on what they believed at the time, and every person had carried their own fears without fully understanding someone else's struggles. That realization changed the tone of the entire evening. Instead of searching for someone to accuse, they began searching for something much more valuable: understanding. Sometimes healing does not begin when every question receives an answer. Sometimes it begins the moment people stop fighting against the truth and finally choose to accept it together. The caller then revealed one final detail that nobody in the room had expected. Long before misunderstandings had separated everyone, there had been a sincere conversation that was never allowed to reach the people who needed to hear it. A heartfelt message had been delayed, an important explanation had been ignored, and a simple misunderstanding had slowly grown into years of emotional distance. No one had intended for life to unfold this way, yet one small moment had quietly changed the direction of countless others. Hearing that revelation did not erase the past, but it finally explained why so many events had never made sense. Don't skip. After the call ended, no one spoke for what felt like several minutes. The silence no longer felt uncomfortable. Instead, it felt peaceful, almost healing. The person who had spent so long preparing the surprise looked around the room and realized something remarkable. They had originally believed the greatest gift they could offer was the carefully planned surprise itself. Now they understood that the greatest gift had already happened before the surprise was ever revealed. The truth had finally found its way into the open. Old misunderstandings had lost their power. Hearts that had once been divided by uncertainty were finally standing on the same foundation of honesty. Even so, one important step still remained. The envelope was gently placed back on the table, not because its contents had become less meaningful, but because everyone agreed that no important decision should ever be made while emotions were rushing like a storm. They chose patience over pressure. They chose clarity over excitement. For the first time, nobody was trying to force an ending. They simply allowed the truth to breathe. As evening turned into night, they stepped outside beneath a quiet sky filled with countless stars. The cool breeze carried a feeling that was difficult to describe. It was not certainty, because the future had not yet been written. It was not fear, because fear had finally lost its control. It was something far more powerful, a quiet confidence that whatever happened next would be built on honesty instead of misunderstanding. That alone made every painful chapter worth surviving. Don't skip. Just as everyone prepared to leave, a small package resting near the entrance caught their attention. No one remembered seeing it earlier. There was no sender's name, no return address, and no explanation attached to it. Carefully tied around the box was a single handwritten note containing only one sentence. The surprise you planned was never the only surprise waiting for tonight. Everyone looked at one another in complete silence. The package remained unopened. No one knew who had delivered it, when it had arrived, or what was hidden inside. Yet somehow every person present felt the same quiet certainty, that opening it would reveal a truth capable of changing not just one decision, but the future of every relationship connected to this remarkable journey. For several long moments, no one reached toward the mysterious package. It rested quietly on the table as though it had all the time in the world, while every person in the room felt their heartbeat growing louder with each passing second. The strange thing was not the package itself, it was the feeling surrounding it. It carried no threat, no warning, and no obvious explanation. Instead, it seemed to hold the weight of unfinished answers. The person who had spent so many months preparing their own surprise slowly stepped forward, placed a hand on the box, and closed their eyes for a brief moment. They whispered to themselves that whatever waited inside could not be more powerful than the truth they had already chosen to face. With calm hands, they untied the ribbon and carefully lifted the lid. Don't skip. Inside was no expensive gift, no dramatic symbol, and no object of great value. There was only a carefully wrapped journal with a single handwritten note resting on top of it. The note simply read, "Every ending looks different when you finally know how the story truly began." Those few words immediately filled the room with quiet curiosity. The journal looked old, its pages worn by time, yet it had been preserved with remarkable care. As they gently opened the first page, they discovered that it had been written over many years by someone who had silently witnessed pieces of everyone's journey. It was not written to judge anyone. It was written so that, if the truth was ever needed, it would never disappear completely. The first entries described moments that seemed ordinary at the time but later became life-changing. Conversations interrupted before they could finish. Honest feelings misunderstood because nobody asked one more question. Small decisions made in moments of fear that quietly shaped the future for years. As each page turned, the room became quieter. People who had once been absolutely certain about what had happened began realizing how incomplete their understanding had been. Memory, they discovered, had quietly rewritten many events. The journal did not accuse anyone of being cruel. Instead, it revealed how easily fear, assumptions, and silence could transform ordinary misunderstandings into lifelong regrets. Don't skip. Halfway through the journal, everyone reached a page marked with a folded piece of paper. Unlike the earlier entries, this page had never been finished. The handwriting stopped in the middle of a sentence, as though the writer had intended to return but never found the chance. Attached beneath it was another small note. If you are reading this together, it means the truth has finally brought everyone into the same room. That alone is a greater miracle than anything I could have planned. Those words touched everyone differently. Some smiled quietly. Others lowered their eyes, remembering all the opportunities they had lost simply because they assumed tomorrow would always offer another chance. In that moment, nobody cared about proving who had been right or wrong anymore. They cared only about making sure that history would never repeat itself. The person preparing the surprise slowly looked around the room and realized something unexpected. The surprise they had worked so hard to create was no longer just for one person. It had become a gift for everyone present. Every conversation that followed was honest. Long-held misunderstandings were gently untangled. Questions that had remained buried for years were finally asked without fear. Answers arrived without anger. The room that had once carried tension now carried something much stronger, peace earned through truth. Don't skip. As the final pages of the journal were turned, one small envelope slipped onto the table. It had remained hidden between the pages all along. Unlike everything else, this envelope carried a name on the front. The person holding it immediately recognized the handwriting but remained frozen for several seconds before opening it. Inside was a short message. If you have reached this page, then you already know that love cannot grow where honesty is missing. Do not waste another season waiting for the perfect moment. Perfect moments are created by honest hearts willing to take one brave step. The words settled deeply into the silence. No one rushed to speak because everyone understood that some messages deserve to be felt before they are answered. Just then, footsteps echoed softly outside the room. A gentle knock came at the door. Everyone turned. No one had expected another visitor. The person closest to the entrance slowly opened the door, and the face waiting outside caused every conversation to stop. The visitor smiled warmly and quietly said, "I believe this belongs to you." In their hands was one final item connected to the surprise that had begun this entire journey, something that had been missing from the very beginning, and something that would reveal why every delay, every misunderstanding, and every unexpected turn had ultimately led everyone to this exact moment. The room became completely silent as the final visitor stepped inside. No one recognized them immediately, yet there was something calm and reassuring about their presence. They carefully placed the small package on the table and smiled before speaking. "I wasn't asked to change anyone's decision," they said gently. "I was only asked to make sure this reached you when everyone was finally ready to understand it." Those words carried no drama, only quiet certainty. The person who had spent so long preparing the life-changing surprise looked at the package with steady hands. After everything that had already been revealed, they no longer feared the truth. Whatever remained hidden would simply become another piece of a story that had finally chosen honesty over silence. Don't skip. Inside the package was a beautifully crafted wooden box. It was simple, elegant, and untouched by time. As the lid slowly opened, everyone expected to find something extraordinary, but instead they found something surprisingly ordinary: a collection of photographs, a few handwritten notes, and a small silver key tied together with a faded ribbon. At first glance they looked like ordinary keepsakes, yet every item represented a moment when life could have taken a completely different direction. One photograph captured a day when two paths had almost crossed but never did. Another note revealed an apology that had been written years earlier but never delivered. A third page described a decision made out of fear rather than truth. Looking through those memories, everyone realized that destiny had never been working against them. It had simply been waiting for people to become emotionally ready for the future they claimed to want. The final handwritten letter rested beneath everything else. Unlike the others, it had no signature. It simply began with one sentence. If you are reading this today, then it means every delay has already taught you what impatience never could. The room remained silent as the letter continued. It spoke about the importance of forgiveness, reminding everyone that carrying old pain into a new beginning only creates another ending. It explained that love is not proven by grand speeches, dramatic sacrifices, or perfect timing. It is revealed through consistency, honesty, humility, and the willingness to choose understanding even after disappointment. Every sentence felt less like advice and more like a mirror reflecting the journey every person in that room had quietly lived. When the final line was read aloud, there was not a single argument left to win, not a single accusation left to make, and not a single misunderstanding left worth protecting. Don't skip. The person who had prepared the surprise slowly stood up and looked around the room. Their eyes were filled with emotion, but there were no tears of regret anymore. Only gratitude. They realized that the greatest surprise had never been the carefully planned letter, the hidden package, or the forgotten journal. The greatest surprise was discovering how much healing could happen once people chose truth over assumptions. Every difficult chapter, every painful goodbye, every delayed conversation had shaped them into someone who finally understood that genuine love begins where pride ends. With quiet confidence, they placed the envelope they had written from the very beginning into the hands of the person it was meant for. No dramatic promises followed. No unrealistic expectations were spoken. Only one simple sentence filled the silence: that I don't ask you to erase the past. I only hope we never allow fear to write our future again. Those words carried more strength than anything else said that day. The response came not through a speech but through a warm smile and a gentle nod. Sometimes the most meaningful answers require no explanation because the heart already understands them. Don't skip. As everyone stepped outside, the evening sky glowed with the soft colors of sunset. The long journey that had begun with unanswered questions had not ended with perfection, it had ended with peace. And peace, they finally understood, was far more valuable than the perfect ending they had once imagined. Every person walked away carrying something different. Some carried forgiveness. Some carried wisdom. Some carried renewed hope. But all of them carried the same lesson: never allow silence to replace honesty, and never allow fear to decide the future before love has been given the chance to speak. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the horizon, the person who had once believed they had lost everything looked back one final time. The road behind them was filled with memories, mistakes, and lessons. The road ahead was unwritten, yet for the first time it no longer felt frightening. It felt full of possibility. And that is how the greatest surprise was finally revealed, not as a single dramatic moment, but as the quiet realization that lives can truly change when people choose courage over fear, truth over misunderstanding, and hope over regret. Sometimes the most extraordinary endings are simply the beginning of a better chapter, written by hearts that have finally learned how to love with honesty, patience, and grace.